Yesterday, something terrible happened in the news, which brings up a very interesting, broader question, which I'm going to get to. But what happened was there was a terrorist attack, and there was a man with a thrower who was burning up, he's an anti-Semite, burning up Jewish people. And when the media got wind of this, they're saying he was a white man. And this person, the terror, had gone white, and he didn't have a shirt on, and he was very light-skinned. It turns out that this man's name is Mohammed Soleimani, and he's an Egyptian, a Muslim Egyptian. You can tell by his name, Mohammed. So the question is, are the Egyptians black or white? And if they're white, how did they become white? A few years ago now, there was a movie called The Gods of Egypt. Actually, the director of the film is of Egyptian descent. But when it came out, there's a lot of controversy because the cast was multiracial. And people, since it had a lot of white people, European people, in prominent roles, even though the director himself was Egyptian, they were accusing this movie, The Gods of Egypt, they called it whitewashing. Whitewashing. And I want to say something in defense of the movie. I wrote a book called The Aeneid about Egyptian mythology. And the reason why I wrote that book was to understand the cultural background of Moses and the Exodus. What beliefs would Moses had grown up with as a prince of Egypt. So I wrote the book, I researched it, I wrote it and illustrated it, and I think it's one of my better books that I wrote. I'm very proud of it. And I suspect that they used my book both in that movie, The Gods of Egypt. I think they borrowed from my designs and ideas and concepts that I came up with in my book. And also, it's very interesting, in the movie, the miniseries, the Marvel miniseries, Moon Knight, they refer to the title of my book, The Aeneid, several times. I was wondering if these people, I didn't get a commission or anything from it. And I got a wicked stepsister, but I have a wicked sister as well. And I've written several books. She's like, your books suck. Nobody wants to read your books. Your books are all trash. I bet they don't even sell. Well, they do sell, and this has been one of my more successful books. And I think it's a very good book, despite her vicious attacks and gainsaying. But back to the Gods of Egypt movie, there are things, I understand that when it came out, it's kind of controversial. I think the movie does a good job in showing certain aspects of ancient Egyptian religion and mythology. For instance, it shows Ra's solar barge, it shows the Amduat, which is the Egyptian netherworld, the realm of the dead. There are flaws in the movie, but I think it's not the director's fault. It's the Hollywood formula. One of the biggest things to me, as the writer of the Aeneid, is they left out Isis and Osiris. That's a pivotal part of the story. But Hollywood has a formula. You got the hero's journey, and the hero has to change. And if you're looking at that story, who's the main character? Who's the hero? Horus. So, and then they wanted to bring in how do you identify with a god? So they brought in human characters. But I think the movie should be, if you're interested in Egyptian culture and you want to, or just say have a casual interest in Egyptian culture, and it's a good way it's a good introduction to Egyptian mythology and the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. But there's a lot of heat when that movie came out saying that, and when the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings about Christian Bale played Moses, and there was just a lot of outrage. So the question is, were the ancient Egyptians black? And now you see this guy, he's a full-blooded Egyptian, he's got his shirt off, and he's, blinding, bright white skin. How did that happen? So the first off is the question is, were the ancient Egyptians black? But I think we need to look at that. There's different regions of Africa. You have sub-Saharan Africa, you have North Africa. North Africa is part of the Mediterranean world. And let's just look at some. Let's look at. So I've been to Egypt 4 times, and you see today in modern Egypt, you see a great racial diversity. Most people are dark complected and have black hair. Almost everybody does. But I remember I was in Old Cairo. I saw these children playing. White is a very light-skinned kid with blonde hair. And so you do see it. I've seen people with blue eyes, blonde hair in Iraq, across the Middle East. It's rare, but these are indigenous people that have these features, even though most people are dark complected. One time I was on the metro, the Egyptian train system, and I was sitting, and there's a man sitting across from me. He's reading, he has light skin, red hair, and I assumed at first that he was American or a European. He's reading the Quran. I realized quickly that this guy's actually a native Egyptian. And we had Jim Becca over here, and he's talking about how he helped start one of the earliest Messianic congregations in Israel, and he helped build their music team. And they were under attack by this radical Jewish terrorist organization called Kahani Kai, because there's Meir Kahani, this is a Jewish, some people say he's a terrorist, very controversial figure, but he was murdered by a Egyptian man, a full-blooded Egyptian man, immigrated to the United States, called Mahmoud the Red. And there's a picture of this guy, and redhead. So full-blooded Egyptians with very white skin and red hair. And another thing is, I saw with my own eyes the mummy of Ramses, and most scholars believe that Ramses is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And he died in his 90s, and his mummy is very well preserved. You look at his features, he's got a long nose, a narrow nose, thin lips. He was mostly bald, but he had hair on the sides of his head, and he had red hair. Ramses the Great had red hair. And they tested his hair to see if it was dyed red during the mummification process. Scientific test, but it turns out that he was a natural redhead. So we see redheads in Egypt today. We see one of the most famous ancient Egyptian pharaohs is a redhead in ancient times. But people look at other things, like look at this, like here's a statue of Osiris. Look, he has black skin. What do they call it? Chthonic? He's a chthonic deity. He's the Lord of the Netherworld. That's what the whole Aeneid story is about. He's condemned, I guess, if you will. Even though he's resurrected, he becomes the Lord of the Netherworld. Osiris, the afterlife. He's the prince of the afterlife. So because he's of the Netherworld, his skin is dark. But also, he is a fertility god. The word for Egypt, well, the Egyptians called their own land was Kemet, which means black is the black soil, the fertile soil. So he's an agricultural god. Sometimes they'd have these they make these little, they bury like a sculpture of Osiris, and it had seeds planted in it. So the idea is that, it would grow, sprout and blossom later on. So we see a lot of Egyptian art. Egyptian art was very symbolic. And we could see that. I mean, they're capable. You see that. We see it all the time. Is the forms in ancient Egyptian people are always in profile and things like that. That was the ancient Egyptian culture was a very traditional culture, and that's the way things were drawn in ancient times. I mean, you're looking at a 3,000-year-old civilization, right? I mean, the oldest pyramids are about 3,000 BC. So when did the ancient Egyptian civilization die? Well, Coptic Christians preserve the Egyptian language to this day, but the Coptic language is used in church services, but with the rise of Islam, the Egyptian culture as a living, vibrant culture died. It was Christianized, and there's a lot of, the reason why the Egyptians quickly converted to Christianity, because there's a lot of concepts in Christianity that's shared with the ancient Egyptian religion. Like, honestly, Osiris is like a type of Christ figure. He dies, he rises again, becomes the Lord of all, in a sense. There's other parallels, but let's look back at what we're talking about is the art. So in art, Egyptian men are often depicted red. Why? Why are men depicted red? Because they're athletic, they're in the outdoors, they're in the sun, and the sun tans their skin red. Women are depicted as yellow. Why do women have yellow skin? Because women are the lady of the house. They stay indoors. They don't have their skin isn't as darkened as the men. So as a sign of manliness is reddish skin. A sign of femininity is a paler skin, which is represented symbolically as yellow. So, the Egyptians would depict foreign races. And so they depict black people. But I have to say, so last time I went to Egypt, we started in Cairo. I went to go see Abu Simbel, which is gigantic statues of Ramses the Great. So me and my brother go there and we see Ramses the Great. And you notice, just the people around you, that this is in Nubia and people are black in Nubia. There's lighter complected people there, but it's like a transitional area where you see less and less whiter complected people and more dark complected people, just straight up black people. And I think this goes back to ancient times. I think that's just like a line of demarcation between the white world and it's kind of a universal thing in India. In India, I mean, people from Kerala, where St. Thomas went, a lot of people are very dark skinned. A lot of St. Thomas Christians there's a community of St. Thomas Christians where I grew up, and or somebody like Dinesh D'Souza, he made this remark in his movie 2016 that his skin is much darker than Obama's. So up in Pakistan and North India, people are lighter skinned, but the further south you go, the darker skin that people are, and that's true in Egypt. And I really doubt this is a new development. I think this reflects how things were in ancient times. So when it comes down to it, ancient Egypt, before I move on, I want to say that there were black pharaohs. I think the 25th dynasty, clearly, but there were Nubians and Cushites who took over. And the Egyptians, you had the Magi as kind of like an elite police force, and they were all black Africans. And that made them stand out, as you knew who the Magi were because they're darker skinned than most Egyptians. So what I'm saying is, today Egyptians are darker complected people, but the nation is racially diverse now. But 90% of people have darker skin. There are some people that, like this Egyptian man, he's white, Raymond Ibrahim. Well, he's Egyptian. He's a little dark complected, but he's got light skin. I remember I was at a Coptic church, and I was talking a lot of these are Egyptian, immigrants and children of immigrants, and most of them have Middle Eastern features. Everybody pretty much has black hair, but there's this one person there, and it's like if I didn't know this person was Coptic, I'd assume he's a white guy. And there's another time when I was in the Middle East. I was in Syria. I was in Marat Seynaya, outside of Seynaya, which is outside of Damascus, a little Christian village. And I was at a seminary, and there's a lot of seminary students, and there's some guests there. And the bishop he's from Iraq came to visit, and there's a young man there, blonde hair, blue eyes. I assumed that he was another traveler like me, but once again, this young man, who looked like he's an American, was Iraqi. He's a Syrian Christian, not European or of European descent. So most people are dark complected, have black hair, but there is a racial diversity represented in Egypt today, in the Middle East today. And in ancient times, we see the same thing. So sometimes people try to claim, well, look at Cleopatra. Cleopatra was descended from the Ptolemies, the Greek general, the friend of Alexander the Great, perhaps his brother, Ptolemy the Great. So they're descended from the Greeks. And there are statues and coins showing Cleopatra, and she doesn't have features associated with, these are sculptures she had of herself made, and she doesn't have characteristics that would identify her as being black. And she's not described as being black by any of the ancient historians. And she might have, a lot of the Ptolemies didn't even bother learning Egyptian. Apparently she did. She took more of an interest in the local culture, and she spoke Egyptian. But another thing is, like I said, when you look at Egyptian art, it's traditional, it's formalistic. It's just ancient styles that they used. They didn't like to have. It wasn't a culture of change and innovation. Right? They want to maintain the ancient traditions. They always want to have a connection with the past. 1,000 years ago, that's how they drew things. The Egyptians were not going to change how they. You have more realistic representative sculptures, but you have to understand, even the sculptures are, it's like this is a pharaoh. They're gonna sculpt pharaoh with looking young or muscular and strong. That might not have been reflective of his actual appearance. So they're idealizing things, but Egyptian sculpture is more realistic than the art, which is very formulaic. But what do people say about white people and, people that believe all the Egyptians are black? Look, I don't care. I study ancient history. I just care about the facts. If the Egyptians are black, that's great. There were Egyptian cultures in southern Egypt and in Sudan. They had pyramids. There's all kinds of pyramids in Sudan. You had Egyptianized cultures, black African Egyptianized cultures. And no one could deny that these Kushite and Nubian Egyptian cultures were Egyptian and black. They were. But to say all of Egypt was black and that the Egyptians are black people, that's just not where the evidence goes. And if they're black, I want to have any of them. So what? It doesn't matter. The problem is we're imposing these racial characteristics, these racial categories, and these racial identity politics that these people wouldn't even understood upon. That's really a bad thing to impose. This is a way of posing our messed up issues and problems we have with race. Why should we look at Egyptian with those filters? Why should we impose racial identity problems and conflicts we have on these ancient civilizations like the Egyptians who they didn't have any of these concepts of race that we have today. We shouldn't these ideas which are imposing on them are totally foreign. They probably would be perplexed and confused. I mean, and Egyptians are today. When you say, what do you mean Egyptians are black? We're not black. I mean, yeah, down in Nubia we're black, but it's not a black African country. We're North Africa, but we're not black Africa. So Egyptians are kind of, and you get there and you look around, you can see the truth for yourself. So what do these people that are denying reality do? Well, and this is also important because you have the Nation of Islam. Muhammad is black. All the Muslims are black, 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 black. But then you have to say, oh no, that like this person, this terrorist, white man with a flamethrower burning Jewish people, but he's an Egyptian man. He's an Arab man, and he's white. So now we have it finally being acknowledged that Arabs are white. So one of the problems, like I mentioned, is the Egyptians had their styles. They used colors in a certain way. Like I mentioned, black could represent the netherworld. It could represent fertile soil. It didn't necessarily represent pigment. Sometimes it could, though, depending on the context. What is this sculpture? What is this meaning? What does this art mean, right? Are they really trying to depict accurately skin tone, or does this have a theological message in it? Were the Egyptians really red, and were the women actually yellow? But there's a lot of, they call these the Fayum portraits. And so what happened is, this is during the Hellenistic period, and these people were maintaining ancient Egypt. These are Egyptian people. They're Egyptian because they're worshiping Egyptian gods. They're being mummified according to the ancient Egyptian style and traditions, but they're using modern, for that time, Greek art. So it's not the formalistic patterns we saw in ancient Egypt are not being used in the Hellenistic period. So you see a painting of three, not all this angular and profile stuff. You see paintings of Anubis, a realistic type painting, but of course you got a dog head and all that. So these people would have portraits made during their life, and when they died, they would have, because the idea is your soul leaves its body, it needs to come down and recognize their ideas about the afterlife. They wanted their face to be able to, that's why they mummify things. They believe that to have eternal life and mortality, the soul has to see the body after a few days after the mummification process. It's just their traditions. So that's the tradition, is you want to have your face on your casket or the mummy coffin. So they would do these paintings, and they would have them put on the face, so the soul and spirit can see that this is you, and it's your physical body as you prepare your journey into the netherworld, go into the duat. So these paintings that are made in the Greek style depicted Egyptians as they look today. Middle Eastern in appearance. Some have darker skin, some have lighter skin. Most everybody has black hair. They just look like, how we imagine most Arab people looking today. So these realistic paintings on the Fayum mummies, the Fayum portraits, show Middle Eastern, not black Africans. I don't think any of them depict And this is in southern Egypt too. I haven't seen. There might be a couple that where they have sort of black African features, but most people look, lighter skinned and, of course, darker hair and some darker skin, but not black. So it's like, how do you get around that? It's like these are realistic paintings from antiquity, and the escape. If you have to explain away evidence instead of going where the evidence leads, you have a problem, right? Your hypothesis theory is not correct. We should let the facts speak for themselves, and we should be true to history. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't impose your ideology on the evidence. And what they try to say is like, oh no, this is a Greek colony. A Greek colony? Are you kidding me? I mean, they're not worshiping. Now, there was kind of a syncretic religion in Alexandria where, Ptolemy is like, okay, we have a Greek people living in Egypt. Let's try to merge our religions together so we can live in peace. And actually, there's religions. The religion of Isis and Osiris was spread around the Roman Empire. Actually, kind of a minority religion, but it was a religion that was found. They'd had temples of Isis and the Egyptian gods, even in Rome. It's kind of like a mystery religion, but it was not a large religion, but it was represented through the archaeological evidence all across the in major Roman cities like Rome and other places. Egyptian gods were worshipped. But here in Egypt, I think the evidence, why would you think that these people are anything other than Egyptians? I mean, that's just, yes, you have Hellenism. You probably had Greek artists came, and probably the Egyptians probably learned what was contemporary modes of art and painting since culture changed. And they are maintaining some ancient cultures, but they're also using new, modern, and realistic art in Greek innovative concepts or innovative Greek concepts in painting and art. So that should settle it. You see these paintings of Egyptians by Egyptians, people, official portraits. I want you to do my portrait. And it's such a realistic representation of them, they're going to put it on their mummy. And it's got to be realistic because they want their spirit to be able to recognize it so they can achieve eternal life. But for people and it's like, this isn't like a Greek hub like Alexandria. This is pretty deep into Egypt. So these people they're Hellenized Egyptians, but they're Egyptians. And they're able to depict themselves in realistic art, and we know what they looked like. And I think trying to rewrite history or, I mean, the Egyptians were not, like I said, there are redheads, there are blonde people, but that's a small minority of the population. Man, how 1%? Most people if you're going to take an Egyptian, it's like, you're going to put these racial, American racial categories on these people. Are they white or are they black? That's oversimplification. I don't think we should impose these characteristics or these categories on these people. If you're going to do that, though, you'd have to say, well, they're white because they're not black Africans. They're just not. Some of them are, especially in certain regions. And I think there's 2 black African dynasties that ruled over Egypt. The 25th dynasty is the one, I'm not sure which the other one was at the present time. But I think it's very bad to impose our ideas on ancient civilizations. We have to let these people speak with their own voices, their own identity. Don't impose. Like I said, we got these psychosis, racial, sick, twisted, destructive racial obsession, which were foreign to the ancient Egyptians. We should not impose these ideas on these people. And it's back to the Moon Knight movie. Did they use my book? Maybe. I think they probably used my book on both the Gods of Egypt and Moon Knight. I've seen most of Moon Knight. I like to go watch the whole thing. I was kind of disappointed with Moon Knight because it's one of the first comic books I got was Spider-Man versus Moon Knight. And originally, Moon Knight was like a Batman character where he's lives in a mansion or a penthouse in a skyscraper, and in the past, Batman has disguises and identities. He goes to spy out and find information. So here in the 21st century, they changed Moon Knight to give him multi-personality disorder, or was it dissociative identity disorder, where instead of having disguises where he assumes identities for crime fighting, they changed it where he's got multi-personality disorder, and I think that's a bad idea. It's not true who the character was and what he represents. Batman, I said Moon Knight was like the Marvel Comics equivalent to Batman, except he's Egyptianized. And I think in the late '80s, early '90s, they had a more Egyptian version, with more Egyptian designs and motifs on his costume, ancient Egyptian, instead of the original costume which he wore. But then they moved back to the traditional one. So he had this a mini series, I guess, where he was more the Fist of Khonshu, the Moon Knight. But there's an Egyptian actor called Rami Malek. He was in Night at the Museum. Full-blood Egyptian. Yeah, he's dark complected, but he's he played a white guy from Louisiana in the Pacific. So I don't think he can play Middle Eastern characters. Like Freddie Mercury's he's from Zimbabwe. No, not Tanzania. I think it's Zanzibar. It's a country that doesn't exist anymore. I think it's in Kenya and Tanzania. He's a Indian from Africa, but Middle Eastern racial characteristics. So I can't see Rami Malek playing a black person because he's Middle Eastern. He's not black. He's Egyptian. And in Moon Knight, Oscar Isaac, who's Hispanic, he played the Moon Knight. But the female superhero character, I don't know, the Scarab, whatever she is played by a woman of Egyptian descent. And there's a lot of, you can go visit these countries, right? Just, people have these fantasies of like I said, there were real ancient Egyptian civilizations that were black, mighty, powerful, very highly culturally advanced in southern Egypt and the Sudan. But to say that all of Egypt was all black for all of its history is not correct. And how far back does it go? Maybe in prehistory you had different groups that would migrate and intermarry. Look at like the indigenous people of the Tuareg and the Berber people of North Africa, but some of them, like I said, they're dark complected, but kind of racially hybrid peoples. But like I said, if you're going to impose our racial, categories on these people, you'd have to say they're white, not black, even though they have black hair and they're dark complected. But like I said, some of them are very light skinned, just like this terrorist the other day. So I think it's kind of, you can't enjoy a movie with all these people. It's like, whitewashing. And it's like, have you even read a book on ancient Egypt? What do you know? What do you know? You're speaking out of ignorance. And then you get these people that get so passionate and animated, like it's some kind of, to go where that. What were these people? What do you do with Ramses' mummy? If they had their way, they'd probably burn it because it shows, it's actual. Ramses is long, thin nose, thin lips, red, straight hair, and it's a redhead. So the guy's not a black African. Mightiest pharaoh that lived. And I'm sure most pharaohs were probably darker complected than Ramses the Great, but let's go where the evidence leads. Let's not impose these idiot false ideas on ancient civilizations. And like I said, if they were black, I wouldn't care, but I think it's important because they weren't. And we should not misrepresent history. We shouldn't let these people who are ignoramuses create a false perception of history. This is serious. It seems like an incidental thing. No. Listen, I don't want you rewriting history with you have some kind of racist ideology, and you're trying to impose your racial identity theories on history instead of letting the historical record speak for itself. It's dangerous. So when it comes down to it, the ancient Egyptians, that movie is actually a good movie. It depicts Egypt as it was. Most people are dark complected, but it's a racially diverse ancient empire. It was. And the thing is, if you shouldn't impose our modern racial categories on these people. And some of them were black. But if you're going to do that, which is asinine, you shouldn't paint someone in the corner. White or black, white or black, white or black. Well, white, because they're definitely not black. They're They're Egyptian. Why don't you just let these people be what they are? Let them be Egyptian. Why are you trying to, force history into your categories where it doesn't fit? And you get upset because you don't want to go where the evidence leads to. Like these Coptic Christian friends of mine, the Muslims came, and they imposed Islam, persecuted the Christians until they became a small minority, around 10% today. But the Coptic Christians are they still use ancient Egyptian, for crying out loud. They use the ancient Egyptian calendar with all the names of the pagan gods in the calendar. They use the Egyptian language. These are the people who stayed true to the ancient Egyptian culture, the Coptic Christians. And I don't know, they're Egyptian. They're darker complected. They're not black, though. If you're going to, look at Raymond Ibrahim. What is he? Just watch his videos. He's a great scholar. He's a historian. And as someone who grew up, he's Egyptian descent, grew up speaking Arabic, and I'm sure he's been to Egypt many times, very fully conversant in Egyptian, in Arabic language, Egyptian culture. He looks, and as someone who went and got a degree and studied these things formally, looks at this as like, man, these guys are morons. Don't be a moron. Don't be a moron. Don't let the voice of the ancients speak for themselves. Don't force them to speak what you want or portray them how you want them to be portrayed. Let them speak. Let them be what they were. These are our ancestors. This is creation. These are the people who created civilization. And you just got to go where the evidence leads. This idea to try to impose our perceptions on these people is wrong, and it's destructive, and it has to be rejected.